The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 288. Exodus to Dimitry. Part 1. House Clive was a renowned aristocratic family of the Valhalla Empire. Count Clive looked down at a letter on his desk with stunned eyes. "What is this?" he asked. "As you can see, it is my letter of resignation. I'm grateful for all House Clive has done to support me, but I believe it is time for me to move on. I realized I won't be able to realize my dream if I stay here. No. I won't accept this," the Count yelled. "Rip." Count Clive ripped the letter in fury. The man standing before him was a knight named Logan, an Aura knight ranked 19th in the Empire. He was recruited by House Clive about 3 years ago for a large amount of money. His presence alone enhanced House Clive's reputation within the Empire. But now, that very knight was requesting to leave the castle. Count Clive couldn't hide his shock, caught off guard because he believed he had treated his knight with all his best. Who is it? Who is the wretched crook trying to tempt the proud knight of House Clive out? Is it Halton? Or Markle? I don't know which house offered you what, but I promise to propose an even better offer. Logan, you are now a member of House Clive. If you leave our house like this, and if the news spreads, Clive's reputation will inevitably hit rock bottom." He angrily raised his voice. It was a sensitive matter, thus, the Count couldn't calm himself down. As Count Clive said, Logan was recruited to House Clive 3 years ago after being promised full support for his training. In return, he fulfilled whatever the Count requested. The two had developed a mutually reciprocal relationship. The truth was that Logan never thought of leaving House Clive, not until recently. The knight was one of the people greatly stirred by the recent events sweeping the continent. "I have no intention of going to another house in Valhalla, my lord," replied Logan. "Then why? Why do you want to leave Clive? I believe you also remember the incident around Roman Dimitry in our empire, Lord Clive." Roman Dimitry accepted the Empire's invitation to participate in the festival, knowing we were after his life. Yet he single-handedly defeated our knights, including Morales, and proved his worth. Not only that, but he also killed Barbossa, who failed to block his attack not even 10 times. "I felt my heart burn with passion again when I witnessed that moment," said Logan. Logan was there in the stadium among the crowd. Witnessing Roman's staggering swordsmanship, he believed the young Dimitry was a reincarnation of the god of warriors back then. Valhalla has lost its dignity. The Empire should have let Roman Dimitry go, like how we usually honor the champions, but instead, it intentionally brought Kronos into its lands to assassinate him and lied to the people, taking us as blind. Count Clive, the future I seek is no longer in these lands. I know for certain that I can't live an honorable life as a warrior, at least if I remain here in Valhalla. It wasn't an easy decision to make. After all, Lucas was a native of the Empire and had grown up in these very lands his entire life. However, Logan couldn't stand still when he heard the news about Roman Dimitry recruiting soldiers for his private army. His heart began to beat recklessly, imagining himself receiving Roman's guidance. His reputation as the 19th-ranked knight mattered no more. Roman Dimitry was a man who deserved his respect just by the fact that he had defeated Barbossa. After hearing how Dimitry treated its dead soldiers, Logan was convinced to leave House Clive. "I intend to head to Dimitry. Nothing can turn my heart now. It's not that I was disappointed with my life here in Clive. I'm simply doing this to live out my dream as a true warrior. Thank you for everything you've done for me, Lord Clive." He bowed his head. As Logan turned around and left the room, Count Clive could only watch with devastated eyes. Knights leaving for Dimitry wasn't restricted to Valhalla. People from all across the continent gathered in Adelian, where people stopped before arriving in Dimitry. An inn in Adelian was crowded with various nationalities. Tap. Kaya. A bald man dropped his beer glass hard on the table. Then, after glancing at a man nearby, he naturally started a conversation. "Well, looking at your war scars, it seems like you've been in several battles. Where are you from?" asked the bald man. Across from him sat a man with slanted eyes. From Frank, he replied. Frank, you say? What brings you all the way from there? Isn't it obvious? I immediately quit my job and came to Dimitry after hearing that the hero of Dimitry was recruiting soldiers. I also heard that Dimitry promises proper treatment for the war's dead. So why not serve someone who won't take your death for granted if I'm going to continue this life as a swordsman? I agree with every word. Bwahahaha. The bald man cheerfully laughed. They both knew they would become competitors in the future but enjoyed the time together for now, clinking their glasses filled with beer. The bald man continued his interrogation, asking people around the inn why they had come to Dimitry. He was able to receive various responses. I heard about Henderson and his story. The passion inside my heart began to boil, forcing me to spend restless nights after learning how he, a farmer, received a Legion of Merit and was recognized for his meritorious service. I used to serve under a relatively fine house in Umberto, but what's the whole point of that now? One replied. I'm from Cairo. I know people in Cairo feel quite sensitive about its people moving to Dimitry. But I couldn't erase the memory of following Lord Roman Dimitry on the battleground. He is a god. The way he led his troops in the front, wow. I wouldn't regret even the slightest if I could die fighting for such a man, another answered. I'm a refugee from Odelia. Now that I've lost my kingdom, I want to devote my life to a new country that genuinely cares for the safety of its people. The bald man was from Hector. Indeed, the inn was filled with people from various kingdoms from all over the continent. They were drawn to Dimitry to become Roman soldiers because of Roman's unbelievable accomplishments and how Dimitry treated the war dead. Above all, they aspired to become a formidable knight like the subordinates serving Roman. And, of course, they each had individual challenges leaving their hometown. Nonetheless, regardless of acceptance, they wanted to give it a shot. Then, the bald man's eyes turned to a man under a robe, sitting alone in the corner of the inn. He couldn't take his eyes off the man eating alone. Hey, you! Where are you from? Flinch. The man stopped knifing his meat. Then, he raised his head and replied in an indifferent voice. I come from Frank. I don't want to get involved in your conversation, so leave me alone. You're lying. The slanted-eyes man jokingly smiled at the man's cold response. As a citizen of Frank, he immediately knew the hooded man didn't have the particular accent. People from Frank don't talk like that. From my experience, you must be from Kronos. Right? The atmosphere suddenly turned cold. No one in the room expected a person from Kronos to be present. After all, Kronos was the main reason behind the recent war. Kronos was obviously not welcomed among the people gathered in the inn. Sigh. The hooded man sighed. Then, after putting down his knife, he looked into the eyes of the people surrounding him. That's right. I'm from Kronos. Well, you're one brazen lad, aren't you? If you have even the slightest shame, you wouldn't have come here to join Dimitri's army, especially if you're from Kronos. No regulations could indeed prohibit you, but why? The people were curious to hear what he had to say. They couldn't understand why a man from the strongest empire on the continent and an enemy of Dimitri until just recently would want to serve the enemy's leader. They believed the man was a spy. And since the people gathered in the inn had come holding much respect for Roman Dimitri, they gazed at the man with disdain. I understand that my origin puts me in a bad light. However, I've grown tired of Kronos' wickedness as much as you are. Even after agreeing to a ceasefire with Dimitri, the Empire destroyed Odelia's capital and killed Baron Charlton, who failed to bring out a successful negotiation. Do you know why? They murdered the Baron who had devoted his life to the best of the Empire just because he kneeled before Roman Dimitri. He had to accept his pitiful death without any rewards. Kronos is a ruthless empire. And being a father, I refuse to raise my child in such a country, the hooded man answered. No one in the room expected to hear such a story from the man. The people no longer glared at him with the same eyes but were quite perplexed. Kronos is the strongest country on the continent. And I believe you will all agree. However, when Dimitry prepared 1 million gold to compensate those sacrificed during the war, Kronos did nothing despite having more money than Dimitry. How deplorable is this? As a man who has also devoted my life to the empire, I now want to live for a leader who can assure me a bright future ahead. And when I heard about the stories regarding Henderson, I was determined to take the risks to cross the border and apply for the recruitment test, he continued. Illegally crossing the borders of Kronos was extremely dangerous. The man had to pour all his wealth to bribe the guard protecting the warp gate and flee the empire with his family, leaving behind all of his belongings. The hooded man gulped his beer glass empty. His wife and his children were trembling in fear, hiding inside one of the rooms at the inn. Kronos was known for ruthlessly punishing those who betrayed the empire. Worried they would get caught, the hooded man moved alone and delivered food for his family. Well, I guess it's not going to be easy to pass the test if we have people from Kronos, too, the bald man muttered. Everyone agreed with his words, noticing the hooded man's unusual vigor. It appeared like the recruitment test would turn out more competitive than anticipated with such powerful contenders joining. The people desperately hoped there wouldn't be a lot of competitors. Most believed they would pass the test as long as only an adequate number of people applied. Captain Jonathan calmly walked down the main road in Dimitry to address a particular task. "Captain, how many applicants do you think we'll have this time?" asked a knight, walking beside him. Captain Jonathan briefly thought it over and replied based on his imagination. "We had quite a number of applicants last time, even when Lord Roman wasn't as popular as right now. But things have changed. Lord Roman is now the heir to the dukedom and has become a knight who has the potential to become the top-ranked knight on the continent." Clang clang. Across from them, they found men pulling a wagon piled with stacks of documents. Captain Jonathan didn't pay much attention to them as he walked past them. The soldiers under direct supervision and command of Lord Roman are considered exceptional even in Dimitry. I heard some soldiers of Dimitry also applied for the position, so I'm expecting as many as 10,000 applicants, the captain continued. 10,000, wow. That's incredible. As Jonathan and the knight continued their conversation, another group of men passed by, pulling another wagon full of paper. To Captain Jonathan's understanding, he had never witnessed such a sight in Dimitry. The application deadline is a week from now. We'll probably have thousands of applications at first, which should gradually decrease as the deadline approaches. To be honest, I'm expecting we'll have a little over 10,000 applicants by the deadline. So, let's hurry. We need to help the admission office to read through the applications, Jonathan said. Yes, sir. The two hastened their steps. Their task was to support the admission office in reading through the applications. While Howman was in charge of cross-checking the applicants' identities in the screening process, Captain Jonathan and the admission office were in charge of the primary screening to rule out those who didn't meet the qualifications. Applicants who failed to meet the qualifications set out by Roman would be immediately excluded from the recruitment process without additional screening. An hour had passed since the application began. Captain Jonathan, who expected to find adequate papers in the office, was stunned when he arrived. The sight reminded him of the battleground. "Come on. Hurry. Move. Watch it. You're dropping all the documents. You bastard. Get your senses together." It appeared like a storm had swept the office. The people were busily running around, carrying documents. And as soon as the person in charge found Jonathan, he cried out with a face almost about to burst into tears. "Captain Jonathan. Please help us. It has been an hour since we commenced taking applications, but we already have 10,000 applicants." Jonathan was beyond perplexed. Only then did he realize that the documents piled up on the wagons he came across on the main road were all applications for recruitment. Chapter 289. Exodus to Dimitry. Part 2. Flip. Captain Jonathan read through the applications as he flipped the pages. The captain was quite perplexed as he read down the applicants' resumes, emphasizing their strengths. So, you're telling me this knight is applying to become a mere soldier of Lord Dimitri's private army, not the Dimitri Knights? Jonathan asked. Yes, sir. We thought the applicants from the previous recruitment were exceptional, but little did we know, we never expected such monsters to apply for this year's recruitment. And as you are aware, the wage is nothing compared to what they could receive serving an aristocrat. The people in the admission office raised their voices. They were as stunned as Jonathan. They had a point. No matter how well Dimitri paid its people compared to other houses, the recruitment strictly recruited soldiers to join Roman's private army, not knights. However, reading through the applications, Captain Jonathan realized that the applicants were far too good and experienced to become mere soldiers. Premier. A 39-year-old knight who used to serve under a prestigious house of Umberto and can manifest level 3 aura. With the proper etiquette and skill set, he has overseen various significant missions, including the escort of aristocrats. The fact that he served as the deputy captain for years and quit right before being named the captain proves his adept leadership. The wars he fought included, etc. And during the recent war between Dimitri and Kronos, he volunteered to join the war. Premier was one of the men at the inn. He appealed his strengths and experiences in his application to participate in the recruitment test. To be honest, his experience alone could get him the job. Dimitri would be a fool if it turned down an applicant with such expertise to join Roman's army. However, Premier was just the beginning of the endless list of applicants. Deputy captain of a massive mercenary group. Top-class mercenary. Knight. Or a knight. The list went on and on. Other applicants were as experienced and outstanding as Premier. Time sure had changed. Back when Captain Jonathan vowed to serve Dimitri, his colleagues and friends had questioned him why he would work for such an insignificant aristocrat. Dimitri's reputation evidently wasn't the best back then. However, the situation had changed entirely. The names on the applications proved Dimitri's enhanced reputation. And above all, Captain Jonathan had been receiving ceaseless calls from his former colleagues requesting him to help them join Dimitri. My son recently learned to manifest his aura. Is there any way you can help him join the Dimitri Knights? How are you, Jonathan? Well, I'm just here to say hi. Do you remember the days we went through training together? By the way, are the Dimitri Knights recruiting any new rookies by any chance? I'll be straightforward with you. Let me join the Dimitri Knights for old time's sake. The pattern of the conversations was identical. They first started by greeting Jonathan and always concluded their words, requesting the captain to help them join Dimitri. And surprisingly, the people who reached out to him weren't just mere soldiers or knights. They all met the qualifications. It appeared that Dimitri's recent compensation policy and the rumors about Dimitri's training system caught the Aura Knights' attention, making them desperate to join. Both Kevin and Chris defeated Aura Knights much more potent than them during our war against Kronos. The rumors that Dimitri teaches special skills have spread across the continent, exponentially increasing the Aura Knights' interest in joining Dimitri. Some even believe that the skills surpassed the aura developed by Alexander. In other words, money isn't their priority in applying to join Dimitri. Captain Jonathan whispered to himself. He understood why people would want to learn the skills taught by Roman Dimitri. As a knight who had also received Roman's training, he knew how much it was worth the spotlight. The captain continued reading over the applications. And as he confirmed the qualifications of each applicant, one name suddenly caught his eye. He gasped in shock. Why is this name here? Among the applicants was an unexpected name. Fred. The captain of the Memphis Knights of the Kronos Empire. This title alone was enough to stun Captain Jonathan. And the man that left the captain so perplexed was the hooded man at the Inn of Adelian. It was another busy day at House Memphis. Ever since the war ended, Marquis Memphis had been overloaded with work. He frowned his face, reading a report regarding Dimitri. How pathetic. Look at those fools so desperate to join Dimitri for just one victory, he clicked his tongue. The recent news about Dimitri's recruitment was a hot potato. It didn't only make a splash in Dimitry but also stirred the entire continent as knights from every state declared to sign up for the recruitment. With knights leaving the houses to join Dimitry, the aristocrats were pressured to dissuade them from going. The people who refused even to raise 1 silver when the knights requested a raise voluntarily offered another gold to win their hearts. It was ludicrous. Marquis Memphis was confident no one in his house would partake in such a foolish act. How can people be so foolish? The reason Kronos destroyed Odelia wasn't because we betrayed them but because those worthless bastards dared to mooch off the empire. Those who are capable and are willing to devote their lives to serve the empire will live as true champions, as the history of this continent proves. The way he viewed the incident was completely different from others. Unlike the people who refused to trust Kronos after learning what Kronos had done to Odelia, the Marquis believed his empire had made the right decision to abandon a kingdom of a lost coalition. If Odelia had come on behalf of the significant coalition with the consent of Umberto, Frank, and Redford, Kronos would have probably kept the kingdom alive and tried to use it for a more significant cause in the future. But there was nothing Kronos could gain from a tiny kingdom like Odelia. Surrounded by the other members of the coalition, the kingdom would only force Kronos to disperse its troops and waste its assets. Thus, the empire judged it more efficient to seize its land and use it as a bridgehead for its grand conquest. Though its plan had failed, the Marquis couldn't understand why people would point fingers and condemn the empire. Not once did he doubt Kronos' objective to conquer the continent. The Marquis believed in the empire's long and proud history. His Majesty promised us the war would resume in about a year. That is when our conquest resumes. Though we have taken a step back due to recent complicating matters, Dimitry won't stand a chance when the time comes for Kronos to engage in a full-fledged attack. Demons resided in the abyss of the empire. Dimitry had only tasted a glimpse of the empire's full force. Knock knock. May I come in, my lord? Come in. A knight of Memphis entered the Marquis's room. He couldn't hide his anxious face as he carefully opened the door. I'm here because it has been a week since Captain Fred hasn't shown up to work, the knight reported. Fred? He never missed a day of work before. Something must have happened to him. Send someone to check on him, the Marquis replied. But my lord, the truth is, ahem. I'm not sure how I should put this, but we already sent someone to check on Captain Fred a few days earlier. No one was at his house. I didn't report this to you immediately, thinking he might have some personal matters to attend to, but today, we confirmed that Captain Fred and his family used the warp gate. Pause. What? Marquis Memphis stopped what he was doing. Then, as his face steadily stiffened, he glared at the knight in front of him. And their destination was Cordes, the knight continued. Cordes was one of the bases Roman captured during the war. It was also home to the warp gate, directly connecting to the east. The Marquis couldn't grasp the knight's words at first, but soon enough, his face grimaced in anger. Are you telling me that the captain of the Memphis Knights fled to Dimitry? It was a report Marquis Memphis refused to acknowledge. The incidents occurring throughout the empire were reported to the Emperor of Kronos. The obliteration of Odelia and the death of Baron Charlton caused a more enormous fissure than he anticipated. So this is what has happened so far, Your Majesty. At this rate, we won't be able to prevent our prodigies from leaving the empire, Marquis Memphis angrily spoke. He couldn't suppress his rage. He wished he could tear Fred to shreds for his betrayal if he could get the chance. All this time, he had belittled the aristocrats who had failed to keep their knights, but never in his wildest dream did he think the captain of his knights would covertly escape his land. Marquis had spent hectic days, overloaded with work. He was so busy, swamped by his tasks, that he didn't even have the time to meet Fred. But he never expected one of his to flee. Interesting, said the emperor with a smile. Alexander's mind was currently in control of the emperor's body. He seemed genuinely intrigued by the major upheaval Roman Dimitry had brought upon his empire. He knew the events occurring in his empire and across the continent weren't simply because of Odelia's destruction and Baron Charlton's death. Instead, a single defeat had caused the turmoil. Kronos' unprecedented loss showed the world that the Empire wasn't invincible after all. Thus, the people no longer had the duty to serve it mindlessly. The only reason the people remained loyal to the Empire despite knowing they could be abandoned wasn't because they had a strong sense of loyalty but because they didn't have any better choice. However, Dimitry offered the alternative and proved it could win against Kronos. Tell the Imperial Knights they are to slaughter whoever intends to betray the Empire and their families, regardless of their stature and status. They are fools willing to risk their lives to serve Dimitry despite being born a Kronos. They are nothing but worthless trash that will hinder our foundation. They aren't needed for the future of Kronos. Yes, Your Majesty. Marquis Memphis left the Emperor's presence. A bloodbath would soon storm the Empire at the Emperor's command. But he didn't hesitate the slightest because fear was always the effective and strongest weapon in controlling the people. So, Roman Dimitri, I hear that Dimitri teaches a special technique to your men. Alexander was intrigued by the rumors. After all, he was the creator of aura in this world. Though he had abandoned his path and became a mage, he wanted to see for himself how formidable Romans' martial arts were. Not once did he doubt the power he created would lose against Romans. As the pioneer, he wanted to test whose power was more vital when compared. Perhaps it was his sense of inferiority from his previous life that desperately desired to test his power. This had nothing to do with the Empire's relations with Dimitri. Alexander simply desired to prove to the people that the power he created was an unprecedented achievement. Thus, he sent his pawns to Dimitri. Those whom he could control just like the Emperor. And if they managed to pass the test, he would use their bodies to test Roman's power himself. More than 100,000 applicants applied to join Dimitri's private army. To think this many capable young men had gathered in one place was incredible. Even the people in Dimitri were stunned by the turnout. They knew Roman's reputation was out of the ordinary but not to this extent, enough to gather thousands of men with one notice. However, the problem was that there were just too many to test. With thousands of applicants still remaining after the initial screening, the members of Hellman, including Lucas, conducted a simple aptitude assessment and secondary screening. Applicants with even minor inaccurate information were crossed out from the list. And Hellman used the tests from previous recruitment, such as the test of courage, to assess each applicant's qualifications. This process alone took several hours. One's physical strength didn't determine the outcome of the test. Those who lacked will and courage were dropped. After 3 days of these tests, Heomum could finalize the list for the final process. Only 5,000 applicants survived the tests before and gathered. Only 500 of them would be named a soldier of Roman Dimitri, and those who failed would at least gain an opportunity to join Dimitri's armed forces. The applicants evidently seemed nervous. After all, they never had to perceive each other as competitors during the earlier tests, but now things were different. They knew the person next to them, behind them, and in front of them were all competitors in the upcoming test. It's Chris. The flash of Dimitri. A group of men entered the ground under the spotlight. The applicants were familiar with the man leading the group. Chris walked past the crowd and stood before them. I'll explain the third test. The rules are simple. Behind me are soldiers currently members of Lord Roman's private army. They have gone through the tests just like you and have made great contributions to Dimitri after vowing their allegiance to Lord Roman. Now, I'll call your names one by one, and you will have to pick one of the soldiers behind me to fight them in a duel, Chris explained. The applicants' eyes grew hostile when they heard the word duel. Behind Chris were men, some who were familiar, such as Kevin, and some who weren't. Victory isn't what will get you past this third test. Obviously, those who win will move on to the final test, but if you manage to put up a good fight and convince us you deserve the spot, you will also move on to the next round. Most of the contenders didn't seem nervous. After all, they, too, had made a name in their countries before leaving to join Dimitri. They believed they had a chance of winning against the soldiers standing in front of them. It was an interesting situation. Chris gave a smile and reached for his sword on his waist. Then, he said to the crowd, I'm also an option you can pick. I guess no additional words are needed. We will start the third test at once. The applicants anxiously glanced at each other, waiting to be called. We'll start with Prabir. Come forth. The test finally kicked off. Chapter 290. Exodus to Dimitry. Part 3. The third test was simple and concise, as Chris explained. Either you prove your worth as a knight by putting up a good fight or beat your opponent to move on to the next round. Pabber desired the latter. The issue is whether I choose someone who has already made a name or someone who is relatively lesser known. Pabber contemplated as he stepped forward. He believed he could defeat at least those who were lesser known quite easily, but he also wanted to leave a strong impression going first. His best option was to beat someone challenging, which should highly likely earn him a passing grade even before moving on to the final test. The knight drew a big picture. He slowly observed the faces of the people standing behind Chris and carefully chose his opponent. Chris? Not a chance. The man, praised as the Flash of Dimitry, had proved his worth by defeating Diego, a member of the continent's 12 Blades. The knight mastered a skill not even a level 6 Aura knight could react to. Pabber knew Chris wasn't a viable option for him, so he erased the name in his mind from the start. Then, Kevin? The young knight, also known as the Devil of Dimitry, was unquestionably the most challenging opponent on the list. It was said he could manifest a level 3 aura. Plus, he had made a name by defeating Blanco during the recent war. Kevin was now on the continent's ranking system, along with Chris. Pabber knew he would automatically win a spot in Roman's private army if he defeated Kevin, but he wasn't a fool who would volunteer to walk down the rocky path. He observed the faces of the soldiers standing before the crowd, one after another. He hoped to pick someone who was relatively known but couldn't dare call out the names of Vulcan and Pucky after looking them in the eyes. He instinctively knew they weren't easy opponents. Failing to think of a strategy to defeat them, his eyes finally landed on one person who seemed like a suitable opponent for him. McBurney. The one-armed knight. A swordsman of Cairo, who used to serve on the South battlefield, had made quite a name for his leadership when Kronos invaded Dimitry. Rumors described his left-handed, irregular sword style as highly lethal. Pabber chose McBurney not because he underestimated the one-armed knight but because he was familiar with the left-handed sword style. Pabber also mainly used his left hand in combat. Simply put, he believed McBurney's irregular attacks couldn't threaten him. I would like to choose McBurney as my opponent, mouthed Pabber. Chris gave a bright smile and gazed at McBurney. McBurney calmly stepped forward. You'll have 3 minutes. We'll decide the outcome of your test within that time. And, of course, if you defeat your opponent before the promised time, you will automatically pass, regardless of the duel. Are you ready? Yes. Then, let's begin. Swish. The flag fluttered in the wind. As soon as Chris took a step back, Pabber rushed forward without a second to waste. Krohar. Rumble. He exploded his aura. He swiftly closed his distance with McBurney instantly while observing his opponent with sharp eyes. To his surprise, McBurney didn't move an inch. The knight slowly raised his blade, predicting where Pabber would strike, but Pabber refused to let his opponent take the upper ground, erupting with his aura. You shouldn't have many options with only your left arm. McBurney only had his left arm to protect his body. In other words, he would have to naturally turn his body in order to protect his vulnerable right side. So, Pabber instantly tilted his body and attempted to attack his opponent from the opposite direction. Whip. He looked ahead and tried to catch McBurney by surprise. Instead of taking advantage of the opponent's weakness, Pabber intended to use that thought against McBurney and use it in his favor. Pabber was indeed an experienced knight. He had experienced countless duels serving under one of the prestigious houses of Umberto, and his years of experience managed to disrupt McBurney's balance. However, clang! The knight's eyes widened in shock. McBurney suddenly began to take weird steps and then blocked Pabber's attack with his snake-like movement. Pabber was utterly perplexed. He felt his thoughts get all tangled up at that moment. He failed even to read how McBurney managed to counter his attack. The knight barely blocked McBurney from taking him down. And McBurney was right up to his nose the second he looked up. Clang! Clink! Clank! A fierce battle unfolded on the grounds. Pabber barely kept himself together while being pushed to his corner. McBurney used a strange technique he could hardly keep up with. At first, it seemed like he was going for his right flank, but the second Pabber tried to block the attack, the knight suddenly switched direction to aim for his left. And as soon as Pabber followed, raising his blade to interdict, McBurney switched again, going after his right. To Pabber's understanding, there had to be a limit to how far McBurney could reach with only his left arm. However, the knight was freely using his body as if he had both arms, pressuring his opponent to the brink of his edge. Never would Pabber know that the key to McBurney's one-handed sword style was the agile steps. McBurney could reach every part of his opponent's body from all directions just by positioning his feet in the appropriate spot. Thwack! Rumble! Ugh, Pabber groaned. Pabber was pushed to the side. He swallowed the pain. McBurney used to be an average knight who didn't know how to manifest his aura back in the South Battlefield training camp. But now his aura was formidable enough to hinder Pabber's level 3 aura. Pabber had no other choice but to admit that he had selected the wrong opponent. McBurney's reputation as the one-armed knight wasn't an empty one. His reputation was built upon the countless enemies he had crushed, those who logically believed they could defeat him, just like Pabber. Clench. Pabber gritted his teeth as he concentrated his aura. Then, he spotted an opening to McBurney's attack. I got you now. The knight attempted to take advantage of the tiny gap between McBurney's attacks. After blocking McBurney's blade, he dove his body forward and aimed for his opponent's heart, manifesting his aura from the tip of his sword's grip. He wasn't worried about the possibility of him killing his opponent with this attack. He knew this was his only choice and chance of defeating McBurney. Crowhair. Pabber's attack was fast. The moment he thought his blade would pierce through his opponent's heart, McBurney instantly took a step back. The distance between the two widened. A single step was enough to keep their bodies away about 3 steps apart. Clang! Then, McBurney smacked Pabber's blade away. He immediately regained momentum after easily blocking the knight's attack, stepping forward with his snake-like movements and pointing his blade up front. Whip. That was the end. Sensing the blade tip pointing straight at his neck, Pabber looked at McBurney with a pale face. I admit my defeat, he said. It was his complete loss. Pabber lost the duel, failing to land one successful attack on his opponent. It was an effortless victory on McBurney's part. Pabber may have thought it was a close fight as he exchanged a couple of offensives with McBurney, but from the crowd's point of view, none of his attacks threatened McBurney. The knight easily countered his attacks and suppressed him in an instant. They were in awe. They couldn't grasp how a mere soldier of Dimitry could easily defeat a level 3 aura knight. However, McBurney's comrades watching the fight didn't seem surprised at all. Pabber, you pass. He passed the test regardless of the duel's outcome. Though he qualified for the final test, Pabber couldn't smile, lost in shock after his defeat. Meanwhile, other duels were also being held in other areas. While Pabber was the first to be called, additional duels had to be conducted simultaneously to test all 5,000 applicants on the same day. The applicants called out their opponents as they were called forward. Those who were called first, including Pabber, chose to challenge renowned opponents, underestimating them. Crack! A sword was smashed to pieces. The applicant trembled in fear, pressured by Vulcan's fierce attacks, and expressed his surrender by dropping his blade, though he still had some time left. He was obviously eliminated from the recruitment process. The men who had made a name serving under Roman proved what true talent was by crushing the contenders. Thwack. Cough. Blood splattered over the ground. After being severely beaten to his face, the contender kneeled before Kevin's cold gaze. The man used to be the deputy captain of a large mercenary group. He believed his chances of winning against Kevin were close to 50-50, but to his dismay, he couldn't even last a minute against Kevin's frightening attacks. He felt devastated. To his eyes, Kevin was nothing but an immature knight in his early 20s at most. However, he didn't even stand a chance against him. It almost felt like his years of experience as a mercenary were being denied at this very moment. But he had no choice but to admit his defeat. Kevin's competence was no lie, and he couldn't even look straight into Kevin's eyes, intimidated by his gaze. Disqualified. One after another, applicants were eliminated from the test. Most of those who were confident in themselves were disqualified, being crushed by their opponents. And surprisingly, more commoners were qualified for the final test. The earlier duels relayed a clear message to the applicants waiting in line for their turn. Not a single soldier of Roman had lost a fight. This is no joke. If you're considering winning the duel to qualify for the final test, I suggest you not choose from those who made a name for themselves. The rumors about them were all true. The soldiers of Dimitry were known as monsters on the battlefield. Only then did the people realize that the reputation didn't solely apply to Roman Dimitry. The next contender called forward was named Thames. He believed he had to make a rational choice for him to pass this test. With competent contenders being eliminated, I should be able to gain an advantage if I just put up a good fight. And to do that, I need to pick an easy opponent I can beat with my skill set. Let's see, huh? One soldier caught Thames's eyes. At the back line of the Dimitry soldiers lined up before them was a young man relatively undersized than others. Thames was a level 2 aura. Though he couldn't be categorized as one of the strongest among the applicants, he was confident he could at least put up a good fight against the young man. He was about 5 feet tall and seemed quite muscular for his undersized body, but Thames wasn't concerned. Physical disadvantage was critical in a duel. Thames, well above 6 feet, believed this was his golden chance to win a spot in Roman's private army, no matter how cowardly he appeared. I would like to choose him. Hunt, come forth. The crowd wasn't familiar with the name. They had heard about people like Chris and Kevin among the knights serving Roman Dimitry, but they had never heard about a man named Hunt. Thames clenched his fist tight in his mind. He tried not to underestimate his opponent since Hunt was also a soldier of Roman's private army. However, he thought the lesser known, the weaker his opponent. The two faced each other. While the preparations were being made for the duel, Fred, the captain of the Memphis Knights, muttered, "That contender isn't going to make it." "Why do you say so?" Looking at their bodies, he might actually have a chance if he can win the upper ground at the beginning. A contender standing next to him asked, unable to understand why Fred would say such a thing. The outcome of the duel between Hunt and Thames appeared evident just by their physical difference. It didn't seem like Hunt was a skilled aura knight. In other words, he would have to overwhelm Thames with his swordsmanship alone with that small body of his, which appeared unlikely. Plus, Thames didn't seem like easy prey. His massive, sturdy body proved that he was far more potent than just a mere soldier. The fact that he underestimates Hunt will drive him to his defeat. Coming from Kronos, I know what Roman Dimitri's men achieved inside out during the battles. They are invincible warriors who have never been defeated, not even once, while fighting on the South Battlefield, West Battlefield, and Valhalla. Simply put, those who are weak are already long dead. They wouldn't be standing there, Fred explained. Ahem. The contender cleared his throat. Something about Hunt seemed unusual after listening to Fred's words. The people don't understand the true purpose of this test. Those who underestimate their opponents won't make it past this round without a victory, said Fred. Just as Fred said, all those who were complacent didn't survive the third test. Either those who put up a good fight against the Dimitry soldiers or those who made a reasonable choice, like Pabir, qualified for the final test. In that sense, Thames wasn't suited to qualify. It was either he win this fight or go home. Arg. Only 5 seconds had passed. A huge, painful cry resounded across the grounds as soon as the duel began, which caught the crowd's attention. Chapter 291. Exodus to Dimitry. Part 4. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. 1. Dash. Hunt instantly dashed forward. He was fast, contrary to his undersized body. Thames was caught off guard as the soldier charged at him, exploding his aura. After all, he expected Hunt to take the defensive. He never thought the small soldier would try to take the initiative against him, a 6-foot-tall giant. 2. Crowhair. Swish. Hunt's blade sliced through the wind. Thames also manifested his aura to block the attack, eventually being pushed away by the impact. One attack was enough to make the knight feel uneasy. 3 to 4 seconds passed as the knight blocked Hunt's attack, staggering backward. And when he raised his face to look at Hunt, a stunning sight unfolded before his eyes. When exactly 5 seconds had passed since the duel began, Hunt caught up to Thames, who was hurriedly backing away, and smashed his face with his knee after smacking his blade away. Thud. Arg. A painful cry filled the ground. Thames couldn't get his senses together, staggering on his feet after taking the blow. He no longer underestimated Hunt. He desperately swung his sword, gritting his teeth, in an attempt to save himself. However, Hunt dodged all of his attacks with his keen eyes and tripped the poor knight over. Bam! The knight pitifully collapsed. Thames didn't even have the energy left to raise his head. Disheartened by the outcome, he listened to Chris's cold voice as blood dripped down his face. Thames, you're disqualified. He squeezed his eyes shut, realizing his utter mistake. He tried not to underestimate his opponent. After all, Hunt was a soldier of Roman Dimitri's army. However, he ended up lowering his guard after seeing Hunt's relatively small body. Thames left the test ground, failing to achieve his goal. However, Hunt seemed unsatisfied by the boring match. He boldly stood in the middle of the arena and cried out angrily. Next. Is there no one who wants to challenge me? Yelled Hunt. He obviously was displeased by how Thames looked down on him and chose him. Hunt couldn't forget the knight's bright smile as if he had found some treasure after rolling his eyes away from people like Chris and Kevin. Hunt used to be a commoner, just like Henderson. After receiving Roman's guidance, the young man, who used to be a huntsman, had become a proud knight of Dimitry. The contenders were annoyed at Hunt's provocation. Even after witnessing Thames's loss, they believed they still had a chance against Hunt's undersized body. I will challenge you. A new contender stepped forward. He was a giant even bigger than Thames. Chris nodded his head in consent. He knew this would mess up the order but also understood under what intention Hunt was provoking the contenders. Flutter. Begin. The second match tipped off. The gigantic contender believed Hunt would be a little worn out right after the first match. He didn't even have the time to catch his breath after storming Thames with his attacks. So, the man took the initiative and rushed forward. Crowhar. The rumbling sound of his aura surrounded the arena. He struck his sword down on the undersized body to suppress him in a single blow. Thwack. Rumble. Their blades clashed. Hunt didn't even flinch. The attack couldn't push him back an inch, though striking him head-on. The gigantic man repeatedly chopped his blade down to finish the fight. His fierce attacks continued. Huge explosion sounds resounded across the area as the two clashed, refusing to back away. But the contender's proud and confident look soon got drenched in sweat as time passed. Something felt odd. No matter how many times he hammered Hunt's meager and feeble aura, it didn't appear shaken at all. Swish. Instead, his arm bounced right back up. He belatedly realized his future would be no different from Thames once he learned he was being forced back. Thwack. Hunt punched the contender's face hard. He immediately lost consciousness and fell backward like a puppet without strings. Plop. The crowd stood speechless. It wasn't easy for them to digest Thames and the gigantic man's defeat. They couldn't believe their eyes. They were perplexed by how even a nobody in Roman Dimitri's army was this strong. Like master, like man. Next, said Hunt. He glared at the contenders with ferocious eyes as if he had become Roman Dimitri. Thames wasn't the first to select easy-looking prey. After watching contenders pitifully drop out, fighting against prominent knights, the remaining ones began to seek effortless victory by choosing easy opponents like Hunt. Their decision was reasonable. Strategically, they had higher chances of moving on to the next round by choosing a relatively easy opponent. However, the problem was that no one among Roman's private army was easy. They may have been a group of ragtag when they first joined, but now they are born entirely anew after years of service following Lord Roman. Chris thought in his mind as he oversaw the duels. The private soldiers of Roman Dimitry had experienced a lot over the years. They had destroyed Barca with Roman, fought battles against Hector Kingdom on the south battlefield, subdued the rebels led by Marquis Benedict, and defeated Kronos on the west battlefield. And even when Roman faced Valhalla and Kronos, they were beside him. The question was, would they have to give all the credit to Roman for protecting them amidst the dangers and bringing victory in the battles? No one could deny that Roman deserved all the credit for their successes. It was a clear fact. Nonetheless, the soldiers and knights wouldn't have made it this far if they were weak in the first place. The test proved it. It proved the power gap between them and the outsiders. The men representing Dimitry proved to others what it truly meant to serve under Roman Dimitry and showed what they had signed up for. Back when people like Henderson first joined, they didn't even know how to wield their swords properly, but the years of experience have brought them to be who they are today, the strongest soldiers on the continent. Thus, we're not here to test how strong the applicants are. Instead, we're looking for men with keen situational awareness, quick to read imminent dangers and the necessary combat skill set. Whoever meets these requirements will be able to improve exponentially as a new subordinate of Lord Roman Dimitry. Chris was confident. He, Kevin, Henderson, and all others stood as clear examples, adding to his certainty. It was as Fred predicted. Those too full of themselves and underestimated the soldiers would never make it to the final round. Only one option remained. They had to prove their worth by crushing the Dimitry soldiers with brute strength. At last, Fred's name was called. As the knight stepped forward, he called out one person's name. "I would like to challenge Chris." Everyone's eyes turned to him that very second. Fred had called out the person who had never been called, not once during the hundreds of duels. Fred saw straight through Dimitri's intention. He knew he could easily pass the third test by proving his worth against an adequate opponent. But he chose not to. The captain of the Memphis Knights refused to take the easy path. He didn't want to betray his empire, portrayed as a coward. As a man raised a knight since childhood and ranked in the top 10 in Kronos, he wanted to courageously take the challenge and prove his worth to the kingdom he now intended to serve. He needed to leave a solid impression to get his Dimitri naturalization. It was a much-needed move for him to remove his Kronos label for his future. Step. Chris came forward. Then, he spoke to the knight in a dull voice as he pulled out his sword. "As long as you're not from one of the lands of Dimitri's dukedom, no restriction can keep you from participating in this recruitment, even if you were the captain of Kronos' knights. In other words, we'll accept you if you pass this test." He was straightforward with his words. Fred also appeared serious. The referee swung the flag when they finally stood facing each other. "Begin." Dash. Tap tap. Fred took the initiative. Chris held his ground and watched Fred rush toward him. And the second Fred was within his attack range, he pointed his blade forward. Chris was fast. As soon as the receptors in his brain received his command to attack, a strong, sharp wind whirled toward Fred, aiming for his arm. Clang. Flames sparked as their blades clashed. Fred read Chris's attack. Words about Chris's lightning speed attack had already reached every corner of the continent. Fred was also aware. He easily blocked the attack, predicting Chris's movement from the beginning. Diego, the enemy Chris defeated during the war, was ranked 4 tiers higher than him. Knowing he was already at a disadvantage, Fred went all out, exploding his aura. Krohar. Whirl. A storm swept the arena. The fierce aura storm approached Chris as if it was about to devour him alive. Crash. Rumble. An intense battle unfolded in the arena. The contenders who were engaged in their own duels watched in awe as the shockwaves struck the ground whenever their blades clashed. The fight between Chris and Fred was on a whole other level. Marquis Memphis recruited Fred, the prodigy of Kronos, and raised him to be the knight he was today for the sake of House Memphis. However, Fred's priority was always his family's safety. Knowing one mistake in Kronos could lead his family to death, he decided to flee the empire he devoted his life to. Fred dove his body closer toward Chris. He tried to keep his distance between himself and Chris no more than 3 steps while blocking the knight's attacks constantly coming after his life. "I'm a goner the second I lose him." Chris was fast as usual, and his attack reached a wide area around him. Fred knew he wouldn't be able to attack Chris if he let the knight keep a distance of more than 3 steps, giving Chris a clear advantage. So, he desperately clung to the knight and exchanged attacks. Soon enough, his forehead was dripping with sweat, completely drenched. Aware that he would lose the fight the second he lowered his guard, Fred exploded his aura around every part of his body. Crash. He shifted right with agile steps to lure Chris in the same direction and kicked off the ground right after dodging his attack, lowering his body. Swish. Crowhair. He stabbed his blade forward. And the moment Chris slightly stepped away to dodge it, he immediately rushed forward, not to miss what might be his only chance. Fred couldn't quite understand how Chris's aura managed to crush a level 5 aura. However, the fact that he defeated Diego remained unchanged. So, he decided neither to doubt nor question facts. The knight before him was undoubtedly strong. That alone was enough for him to go all out. Thwack. Fred finally pushed Chris against the wall. He adroitly drove the situation to his advantage. Chris could no longer make use of his agile speed up against the walls. However, Chris appeared relaxed more than ever. He instead smiled at Fred once he realized he was cornered. In fact, Chris had never lost his composure throughout the fight. The knight had learned how to remain calm even in the direst situation, fighting countless battles alongside Roman Dimitry. "Fred, you pass." Flash. His blade flashed to counter back. Chris used the same skill he used to kill Diego. Fred first saw the attack striking down on him, and the rumbling sound followed immediately after. It was an attack even faster than sound. It was already too late when he belatedly raised his blade to block. Thwack. Wobble. Fred instantly lost consciousness, feeling the pain strike his vital point. He could only read the situation with his blurred vision as he slowly dropped to the ground. Before he even realized it, Chris had already put his sword in its sheath and attacked him with a dull blade. Plop. That was the last of Fred's memory. After a while, Fred belatedly returned to his senses. He looked up at the sky at a loss for words. "I can't believe I lost." It wasn't that he was confident of his victory. Chris was evidently a challenging opponent. Nonetheless, the knight was confident he had the skills to cause an upset. However, he failed to read Chris's final attack. It turned out Chris wasn't even going all out against him and chose to put his sword back in its scabbard in the fleeting moment. It implied that Chris was at least 2 tiers stronger than him. The day Chris killed Diego during the war, he transcended human limits and entered a realm beyond the unknown. All Fred could do was simper as he gazed up at the sky. If the flash of Dimitry was this strong, how strong could Roman be? The question lingered in his mind. I've made the right choice. Dimitry is the only state that can stand in Kronos' way. Naturalization. It was something he had to risk his life for. If he were to fail or Dimitry was to lose against Kronos in the future, he and his family, who used to serve one of the key members of the empire, like House Memphis, wouldn't be spared by the empire's rage. Fred barely picked himself up from the ground. He believed no one among the contenders would be strong enough to defeat people like Chris and Kevin. Wow! What in the world? Suddenly, the crowd began to cheer, gathered in an area a little away from the arena where Fred was lying. People were gathered in 2 places, watching another duel. with flushed faces, they were holding looks of disbelief. And the sounds of their unwitting exclamation proved there was an incredible sight before them. Fred walked toward the crowd. As he pushed his body through the people, he stood before a sight he had never expected to see. Chris and Kevin each were fighting against two different contenders. Kevin's opponent was Logan, the 19th ranked Knight of Valhalla, who was believed to be stronger than his actual rank. But above all, Chris's opponent left Fred stunned. The knight pressuring Chris with his deadly attacks as his silver hair fluttered in the wind was Ares, the strongest prodigy on the continent of Salamander, ranked 3rd in Valhalla, 6th on the continent, and the sole level 5 aura knight among the continent's 12 blades.